Is it against the rule to smile? Should we not smile?
Yeah, you shouldn't.
You can try it again. We'll just...
Yeah. I have to think about what I want to say to intro.
While you're thinking about that, I'm going to grab my phone.
Dude, I was about to start.
That's good. Go ahead and start. And
Why
I'll
are you
come back
going
in.
to
Because
grab your
my
phone?
Bible verse is on my phone.
Oh, okay. I'm going to grab a drink.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I moved. So do I have a doingy? Okay, we're good.
A doingy?
A doingy.
That's funny.
Okay.
See, I did.
This week, what are we talking about this week? The role?
You're the boss of us.
You're the boss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. This week, we're going to be talking about sort of what we talked about last week. It's a continuation of the role of a worship leader. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome to Worship Launch. My name is Zach Dietz, and today I'm joined again by Jamie and Michelle Beeler, as well as one of our other worship leaders here at Evergreen, Lindsay Dale. Thank you for joining us this week, and we're going to just kind of continue the conversation that we were having last week. You know, as we wrapped up last week, we were just talking about how there's so much more that we could talk about. And as I was praying about it this week, the direction that God kind of led me in for this week's discussion, I think is interesting. And so the first question I want to ask you guys is, what do you see are some of the dangers and traps or temptations that worship leaders can fall for today? Jamie, let's start with you. What do you think?
Man, there are a lot. Since we have more people here, I'll just pick one that I see that is potentially an issue, and that is a lot of churches try to emulate other churches, and so we see these high power, high energy churches, and then you see a lot of smaller churches try to do that same thing in their congregation. Yeah. And I think that's dangerous because God has equipped and put into place specific people in specific churches. Like our church is a multi-generational church, and so to try to make this mold fit into our church may not work. Yeah. And there are other churches that maybe they're made up of all young people. So to do a really traditional service may not really achieve what God is wanting to do in their church.
Yeah.
And
I think that's an interesting point because you think about how every church is different. Every church has a different flavor. It's like different culture almost. And even Paul knew that when he was addressing different churches. And I think that is a real danger, especially for worship leaders or worship pastors even, in trying to take a church a direction that God never intended for that church to be. And I think knowing your people, knowing your congregation, and knowing what will work, music-wise, style-wise, whatever. And we talked about this. I did an interview with two of our past worship pastors here, Jerry and Scott, and we talked about being careful in transitioning your church in music style or whatever. And even that sometimes it's good, man, and we've done this, go back and revisit some of the hymns. And so I would encourage you guys to know your people, know your church. And before you try to make your church the next big, high energy, high whatever you want to call, really ask God about that. What does He want your worship team to look like? That's a great point. Lindsay, what do you think? What are some other dangers or temptations even maybe that?
I think two of the probably more obvious are like selfish ambition and pride.
Yeah.
And, with selfish ambition, we live in such a celebrity culture, and people are put on a pedestal. And I think especially for like young believers or new worship leaders, they can look at that and desire those things.
Yeah.
But what's really awesome is that, as you get to know the Lord and just experience his presence, you find that those things just pale in comparison,
Right.
And the only thing that will satisfy you is just being in the presence of the Lord and just being with him.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think with pride, I think it can go both ways. You can think too highly of yourself or have a dependence on yourself instead of the Lord. But you can also think too low of yourself, and with both, you're thinking too much of yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love this quote from C.S. Lewis that says, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less."
Oh, yeah, that's good. And I think that's something we're all kind of learning right now, is checking our motives for things. And I know especially me, like, we've done albums as a worship team, and we're writing songs, and we're like even doing this worship launch, I really had to check my motives for it. And I knew God was leading us to do this, but I never, ever want to do something for my gain or for my name to whatever. And I know God's been speaking to you guys about those things too. And I don't ever want anything that we do as a worship team to become about us. Like if we write a song, man, I hope it's because God wanted us to write that song and because he wants to be worshiped with that song. And I love our team. I love the humility that all of you guys show, and others on our team as well. But Michelle, what do you think? What are some things that we can get trapped with or tempted with or whatever?
Well, when I thought of that question, I thought more in the lines of what Lindsay said. And just, as we're leading worship and we're singing and we're worshiping but we can look out, and if we see the congregation doesn't seem like they're worshiping, it doesn't seem like the Spirit's leading, it's an easy way to start feeling very insecure and thinking, what am I doing wrong? And was I not ready when I came out to worship? Yeah. And to always be ready before the Lord, but also to remember that it is still the Spirit that leads. It's the Spirit that draws them in, that we are only very much in the background. And so it goes with that pride on the other side too, is feeling like I'm doing something wrong. What do I need to do differently? Instead of getting ourselves out of the way.
This has nothing to do with me.
That's right.
Yeah,
Continuing to remember that it has nothing to do with me. So
yeah, man, that is such a danger. And I know because of some of the Facebook groups I'm a part of, I know that worship leaders struggle with that all the time. Why is my congregation not engaging? And I think first you have to realize that it's your relationship with God that matters most. So you've got to be pursuing God, and you can lead them in a way that draws them into worship, but ultimately those people out in the congregation, their worship hinges on them and where they are with God. And so I think it's really easy to get caught up in that and going, man, it really seems off today, like nobody's worshiping. And I think the encouraging thing about that is that if you have done your part to get clean and be right with God, then that's what you need to worry about most before you begin to lead God's people.
I think it's always, I think it's always a check in our spirit when we see that, because when we see it the other way, it's so encouraging, and it draws us closer to the Lord when we see people worshiping. I mean, that's one of the best things that we can experience as worship leaders is watching the congregation. We know they're in the presence of the same Lord that we are, and they're experiencing, worship in His presence, and it's an amazing. We want that. It's an amazing experience to see that.
So, how do we, Lindsay? How do we guard against those dangers? Like what do you do to guard against those things?
First of all, prayer is just huge. I have to be dependent on the Lord, and I ask throughout the week that the Lord would humble me and just empty me of anything that is offensive to Him or doesn't look like Him, and fill me with Him, and just to focus my heart and my mind on Him, and also just to, that's my goal, for me to be focused on Him and to get others to also focus on Him and not on me, to get out of the way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What about you, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key right there is getting to God. If I can get to God and spend time in His presence and with Him, then Sunday is just going to be an extension of what the rest of the week has been. And we talked about that a little bit last week. And that's the most important thing. And I think as a worship pastor, to really be able to identify the unique composition of what God has done in your specific church, and to be able to identify and really pray over your people, and really be able to seek God specifically for your people, and He will bring songs that are appropriate in that appropriate time. He will bring us the worship style that's appropriate for the specific body that He put you in charge of. And I just think that's super important. Number one, to be really going after God with everything that you have, and then really being able to identify how your body's made up.
Yeah. And I think, one of the other dangers I see, especially for worship leaders and senior pastors, is because you're on stage, every week you're going to have somebody come up to you and say, man, worship was so good, or you did such an awesome job, or whatever. And I think one of the dangers is when you start believing that, when you start, encouragement is a great thing. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate congregation members who do encourage the worship team. But I think we can fall for that sometimes and start believing, man, we really did do good this week. Or I want to caution even you guys out there, just to when people come and encourage you like that, I try always, and I learned this from our pastor, but one of the things I always try to do is just deflect that praise to God. And one of my common responses now is, because probably the most not well known, but one of the most common things people come and say to me is, man, worship was awesome this morning. And I get what they're saying, like it was awesome. And so I just respond that way. Yeah, it was awesome. And not because of me, but man, worship was awesome. And so I try not to take any of that praise, but really just deflect that to God. Like our worship to God, that worship, that being a part of that was awesome. And so, this is kind of a broad question, and you can answer it however you guys feel. But Michelle, what one thing, and I know there are probably a lot of things, but has had a big impact on you as a worship leader over the years? Could be anything. It doesn't. If it's a Bible verse, circumstance, or whatever. What's one big thing that has had an impact on you?
Well, Jamie and I's answer is pretty much the same because it changed our life. When we went to Liberty Church, they had a worship pastor, John Kilgore, and I know he was your worship pastor for a while. He was so humble. He didn't like his voice, so he didn't really sing out a lot. He had other people doing it. He led us into the presence of the Lord week after week after week. In choir, we had a big choir at the time, and we would be up there every Sunday morning. And he also had worship leaders as well, but he taught us to be in the presence of the Lord. And he was so humble and so, I probably wouldn't say insecure, but there were so many things. He just always tried to take the backstage. And he taught us, and it's funny because so many people left and scattered abroad and went to other churches, but we will meet with people, and we have over the years, that was many years ago, and we have over the years met people that we get connected somehow because of John. And it's the same story for all of them. He taught them how to worship, and he's since passed, but that experience, I remember times where we were singing and the congregation was singing, and we could just feel the presence of the Holy Spirit so thick on that place. And it wasn't just my experience. We could go talk to those people now, and they remember the exact same thing. And once you experience that, once you learn that and you understand what's possible with the Holy Spirit and with the Lord, you don't want to go back. Like you want that every week. You want that in your quiet time. You want that in your relationship with the Lord. So that was probably one of the most impactful was John Kilgore.
Yeah, and I'd say just to piggyback on that, since we're talking about that, it was kind of a transition. Back in the day, it was a lot of choir specials. It was a lot of choir music, and so it was it went from singing a song, that was on sheet music, to transitioning into worship. And not that those choir specials or whatever can't be worshipful, but it was different because it transitioned from that into this intimacy with God that was unlike anything we'd ever experienced. And once you taste that, you don't want the artificial. You don't want the fake. You don't want anything but the real intimate fellowship and communion with the Father. And so there's the bar has been set, and anything less than that, authentic, passionate, powerful worship just won't do. It just won't do. So as worship pastors, I would probably just encourage you to not settle. Don't settle for good music. Don't settle for good songs or good lighting or good media. Don't settle for anything except for that intimate, passionate, powerful presence of God.
Such good advice. Yeah, never settle. Once you've tasted and experienced the presence of God, it's hard to go back to anything else. And I just love that, like, we've got to experience that together, and it seems like every Sunday, like it's just God shows up over and over. And
I think we can honestly say nothing else is enough. It's just not. If he doesn't show up, it's not enough. It's not what we want.
What about you, Lindsay? What's
there is a scripture. It's Psalm 27:4, and it says, "One thing I ask of the Lord, this is my desire, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon His beauty, and to seek Him in His temple." And that has just really helped me. Just to make sure that my focus and my desire is for Him and Him alone. That, like I said before, nothing else is going to satisfy, only Him, and that my focus is on Him. And also just to gaze on his beauty, just to be with him, just to be with him in his presence. When I'm leading on Sunday mornings, I want my focus to be on him. I want to be so just caught up in his glory and his beauty and focused on him. So that when others see me, they don't see me, but they're like, what is she looking at? I want to behold his beauty, and so that's really helped me.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. I think back to several people who've had big impacts on me, and I remember John Kilgore, who you mentioned. I was a little kid when he was my worship pastor in Borger, Texas, tiny town, but he had a massive choir in this tiny town, and I just remember him leading, and I remember as a kid feeling the power of God in a room, and I don't know that it had anything to do with John other than he was stepping out of the way, but there are many people who come to mind who have had such a huge impact on me and my worship, and even people that would never know they had an impact on me, like Shane and Shane. I grew up, they are how I learned to play guitar, and I don't play guitar near as good as they do, but I've watched them from afar, and I see the humility in the way they carry their lives, and just so many people have impacted my life. My mom, I can go on and on of just people who have had a huge impact on my life. Do you guys have any last thoughts you could share to worship leaders on anything? Just free reign. Michelle?
Yes, I do. So I brought this book. It's called The Reset by Jeremy Riddle, and actually Lindsay recommended it, and so did Zach. I think you finished it, right? There was just so much in here. I just
purchased that for the whole team.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Do we get another one? Or?
No, you don't.
Just asking. So this has been, and I don't feel like it's just for worship teams. I really don't. I think there's a lot of really good information, and he just really gets to the heart of things. And there was just one little part in here, it's not that long, that, and I feel like we talked about this last week as well, in the worship launch, but if I could read this, and I don't think it has to be just about music. I think it can be in other areas of your life, a call on your life. So if the call doesn't require you to lay your life down, it's less than the call of Jesus. If the call doesn't cost you everything you have to obtain it, it's less than the call of the gospel. One of the greatest missing marks on so many worship leaders today is the mark of spiritual authority. I believe this is directly connected to our individual level of surrender. The spiritual authority a believer's life was meant to carry only comes through complete and total abandonment of oneself to God. When God tells us to count the cost of discipleship, He means it. There's a great cost, there's a death. But remember, God has no desire to keep you dead. He only wants to kill the thing that's killing you and infuse you with His own resurrection power, authority, and life. And I just think that's so important in anything that we're doing. It's not about going up and singing a song. It's about complete and total surrender to the Lord and getting out of the way and letting His Spirit do what His Spirit wants to do. So,
yeah.
Anyway, highly recommend this book. It's a great book.
Beat that, Jamie.
I got nothing. Who wants to follow that? No, I completely agree with that. And man, it's so important to get out of the way, And I don't know, since I'm not a great singer, it's not as hard for me to get out of the way because I want to get out of the way. I don't want to be in. I don't want to be in that spotlight. You know, I would think that it would be harder for somebody who has a really amazing voice, you know, because they may want to be out there more. I think just getting out of the way is a huge deal. Putting yourself completely aside, emptying out anything that's going to hinder you from fellowship with God during the week, and laying things aside. There's a Romans 12, 1 and 2 says, "Therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, pleasing to God. This is your spiritual worship." We're called to worship in spirit and in truth. And so I think that's applicable. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. And I think one of the things that we can kind of get stuck in is conforming to the culture, you know, conforming to those big, powerful anthem songs, to be conformed to those things that in and of themselves is not a bad thing, but to desire to be like that. Instead of, I think our call is to impact the culture instead of have the culture impact us. And so I would just say, stand firm and be holy, strive for that holiness, seek after God, get out of the way and let Him do His thing in your specific body of believers.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I think that we should take on the attitude of Christ, that though He was God, He came to serve and not be served. And I think as worship leaders that we are to be servants, and that we serve the Lord, we minister to Him, we pour out our love on Him, and we serve His body, we serve the church. And there's a couple of quotes that I love, and one is by John Piper, and my mind went blank. It says that God is most glorified when we're most satisfied in Him. And then another quote is by one of our Sunday school leaders, Harry Layden, and he says, "Be somebody that God can trust with His glory." And so I want to be that person. So.
Yeah, I love that. Man, I really can't add anything to that. Y'all are awesome. As you can see, I serve with an amazing team, and I'm just grateful for these guys and their hearts for worship. Join us next week. I'm going to be joined by my pastor, our senior pastor here at Evergreen, and we're going to be talking about Colossians 3, talking about songs, hymns, and spiritual songs, and what those terms actually mean. And I think you're going to be surprised that they don't mean what we think they mean in today's terms. So join us next week. Thank you for joining us this week.